A miserable Pacers performance in San Antonio, even without Tyrese Haliburton. Still a bad night for the Pacers. We'll break it all down. Plus, let's talk about Andrew Nembhard's play of late and Kendall Brown, Pacers rookie, 48th overall pick, out indefinitely, stress fracture surgery. Not a lot of good for that or this Pacers team tonight. It's all coming today on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome in to another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and SI, and today we are talking about a dud from the Pacers in San Antonio. They get thumped by the Spurs, the lowly Spurs, who prior to Tuesday, had lost 16 in a row. Credit to them, they beat the Jazz earlier this week as well, but still a team the Pacers should expect to beat. Granted, all-star point guard Tyrese Haliburton was out. That certainly matters, but it shouldn't matter to the extent that it did. We'll get to that. I want to talk about Andrew Nembhard a little bit. I saw a lot of commentary about him during the game. I think his stats tell an interesting story. I have my theories on his play of late and what can be done to better optimize it. And at the end, we'll talk about Kendall Brown, Pacers 48th overall pick rookie, who just had surgery and might be out for the rest of the season. Not great news there for the rookie. We'll start in San Antonio, though. Pacers lose 110-99 to the Spurs. And I think if you just saw that, your takeaway should immediately be that the Pacers scored 99 points against the worst defense in the NBA. Spurs give up nearly 120 points per 100 possessions. That's last in league. Sure, they had Devin Vassell back, but they didn't have Keldon Johnson, and the Pacers could not score. 99 points for the Pacers in this game, and it all just fell apart at one point. It was 44-33 Pacers with a little over 6 minutes to go in the second quarter. So that means for the first 18 minutes, Pacers were playing fine, right? 44 points in that amount of time bodes pretty well for the rest of your evening. You'll probably get pretty close to 110 if you do that. And that would have gotten the Pacers right in this game. For the remaining 30 minutes, the Pacers only scored 55 points. That's miserable. That's less than 2 points a minute. You will absolutely never win that way, and the Pacers did not. Everything completely turned on its head down the stretch of the second quarter. And it's horrible to say that this is a cause of a loss, but they said it on the broadcast. Mike Weiner did the halftime interview with Jeremiah Johnson, and Mike Weiner said, look, at the bottom of the stats page the Pacers have, they have some hustle stats. I don't know exactly what they are because I think the Pacers track some of their own. But he said this is why this game is not a bigger difference, right? The Pacers were only up 2 at halftime despite an 11-point lead at one point. He said, the hustle stats are killing us. We're not hustling enough. I thought Buddy Hield was, and I did not think anybody else really stood out. Duarte was to an extent as well. And in the second half, that just continued. Pacers looked lethargic, slow, uninterested, whatever terminology you want to use. Maybe that's what happens when you're just playing bad and losing, but they didn't, like there was a third or fourth quarter play, I can't remember, where there was a rebound that was available and 4 Pacers standing under the basket, and the ball was kind of carrying me out of bounds, so the Pacers all just stood there, and a Spurs player ran and jumped out and grabbed it and threw it back in, and it kind of looked like it hit the out-of-bounds line, but it didn't, and a couple Pacers players started pointing like it's out of bounds, and the pass just went behind him, and then a Spurs player caught it and laid it in. Like, complete inattention to actually stopping the ball there, and instead on the moment that was happening around them. That was a lot of what happened to the Pacers in this game, but that's the lazy way of looking at it. I always, effort is definitely a factor in wins and losses, but it's never the factor, especially when you play well. Like I said at the start of this game, particularly Buddy Hield, there was a lot that went wrong for the Pacers. A recipe for disaster kind of night when you don't have the effort and you don't have your star point guard. And Haliburton, hopeful, I think is the quote said on the broadcast from Rick Carlisle, that he'll be able to play in Chicago. He's got a sore right calf and wasn't able to play in this game, but a loss to the Spurs, just brutal. Maybe the worst outing of the season for the Pacers. 16 third quarter points. That's when the effort really started to wane, I thought. And it was, I think Kristen Arias said on the broadcast, their second worst third quarter scoring wise of the entire season. But another big takeaway beyond the effort for the Pacers in this game, they allowed so many points in the paint. And that is what the Spurs do kind of well. They're not a good shooting team, so they try to attack the basket. They try to get paint touches. And yet they still smashed their season average and scored 62 points in the paint. And that's a lot. And that kind of does a disservice to how much they were tearing apart the Pacers. They had 40 points in the paint at halftime. 40.5. No team in the NBA averages 60 points in a paint per game. Had the Spurs kept up that level of output, 40 of their 52 first half points were in the paint. If they kept up that level of output and got 80, whew, man, that would have looked really bad on the Pacers, and they just couldn't stay in front of anybody. The Spurs do a lot of stuff to try to create those drives, create those half-step advantage, create those mismatches. Credit to them, even with their third in-line head coach, no Brett Brown or Greg Popovich for the Spurs, they still found ways to be clever on offense to get into the paint and make it happen. And Miles Turner can only clean up so much in a game like this. I didn't think he particularly had the best game anyway, and the Spurs just tore him up. They tore up the whole Pacers team with the points in the paint, which goes back to one of the Pacers' biggest problems all season, just guarding your yard, a term they use a lot, right? Staying in front of your own guy, preventing penetration from the perimeter. That is what allowed so much of the Spurs points in the paint, was the Pacers' inability to get stops away from the basket. They've got to be better in that way, especially against a Spurs team that's what they're good at, but they also did other stuff well because of that, and that's what they typically don't do well. Poor reflection of the way the Pacers played. No Haliburton, certainly a factor, right? That's the Pacers were 2-10 without him entering the night, now 2-11. It's absolutely jarring for a 28-36 team to have a winning record with Tyrese Haliburton playing. That's how much they miss him when he doesn't play. And yet, I still think without him, they should be better than the Spurs. They looked like it for the first, like I said, 18 minutes of this game. But some of the stats that kind of detail how they missed him, 23 three-point attempts for the Pacers in this game. And I think there was an effort from them to attack the rim and maybe not avoid the three necessarily, but, just look for those buckets at the basket. They were doing that like crazy early in the game. I thought this was going to be a show early in the game about how Buddy Hield and Chris Duarte kind of transformed their approach and were fantastic attackers and got to the rim, and that bent the Spurs, and that was huge for the Pacers without Haliburton, and it was for a little bit until it wasn't enough. And so they tried to attack the basket, but either way, without Haliburton, who's brilliant at creating threes and scoring them himself, Pacers attempted 23 threes, their lowest total of the season. Of the whole season, they only attempted 23 threes in this game. That will never work. They only hit 8 of them. The Spurs hit 10. Getting outshot from deep by the Spurs is pretty atrocious given what that team has done from 3 on the season. Pacers attempted 11 free throws. This is a bigger problem when you're trying to attack the rim. You only get 11 free throws. That's their third lowest total of the season. Without Haliburton and without efficient offensive opportunities, they had no chance. I thought it was interesting, right? Without him, the Pacers tried to start George Hill at point guard. So that keeps the rotation entirely intact of where it was, and it just has George Hill assume the starting guard role. And then Nembhard was kind of the guy taking it up the floor, a little more initiator type with the first unit. And again, at first, everything looked good, and I thought, that's turning out to be a good choice. Before the game, I thought, that's fine and correct. And that turned out to not be the right choice. George Hill was fine. George Hill had 7 points. 1 rebound, 1 steal, 3 for 4 from the field. Like, he did about everything you could expect him to do. But I think starting McConnell, who had a pretty good game, all things considered, would have probably been the right move. And then just have George Hill try to run traffic with the second unit. But either way, a lot of disappointing things from the Pacers in this game. Their inability to have consistent defensive force against the Spurs team to keep them out of the paint, to slow them down at all, was disappointing. The Spurs do not have a good enough team or offensive structure, and they were missing their highest scorer, and the Pacers still struggled to slow them down. The Pacers' lack of offensive impact and hustle on that end, right? Once the water was cut off and they couldn't get to the basket anymore like they were for the first 18 or whatever minutes of this game, they couldn't get good looks all night, right? They shot okay. They shot 45%, but when they weren't getting the threes and free throws, that's just a lot of tough twos kind of nights. Buddy Hield was good, 12 for 17. Buddy Hield was great, actually. I did a whole takeaways part about him. Chris Duarte was good. TJ McConnell was good, but not enough from everybody else, and the threes weren't there. Just not enough offensive force. And when you combine those two things with low hustle, low effort, lethargic, and you're missing your all-star, a recipe for disaster, even against a crappy team. And the Pacers lost a game that they'll probably feel like they should have won. If they won that one, that'd be 3 wins in a row. Right in the plane, right, thinking about it. I was talking about playoff tiebreakers yesterday, losing to the Spurs. Not a good indicator of a team that might be headed down that route, although they're still within striking distance, but that one hurts. The Spurs sweep the Pacers this season. That also will hurt the Pacers potentially as they push for play-in, playoffs, whatever they have as their goals for the rest of the season. The only small bright side, if you even want to think about it, is for a Pacers organization that wants the Rockets to finish with the bottom two records, so that the Pacers can get a really good second-round pick in the upcoming draft. Losing to the Spurs certainly increases the chances the Rockets finish with a bottom two record in the league. Spurs and Rockets actually play Friday night. So that's the only silver lining from an otherwise completely atrocious and miserable night for the Pacers in San Antonio, and a game that they certainly would like to have back. Losing both to the Spurs this year could end up haunting the Pacers down the stretch of the season, even without Haliburton in this game. And I say that because I think there's no other choice for our Nissan Player of the Week than Tyrese Haliburton. The most electric player of the week here on Locked On Pacers, brought to you by the all-new electric 2023 Nissan Ariya. Tyrese Haliburton was fantastic this week, 15 and 14 against the Magic, leading the Pacers offense in a win that they needed. And then against the Mavs, their most impressive win in a while, the Pacers come out, and Haliburton has 32 points, and he's hunting his shots. And he showed his duality. He can be aggressive when he needs to be. He can be the assist man when he needs to be. And he is so important to driving the Pacers, which is always key when he doesn't play. He is emblematic of so many great things that are similar to the Nissan Ariya. Electric, brilliantly fierce, fiercely elegant, stunningly powerful. It delivers on duality like Tyrese Haliburton did this week. The Nissan Ariya is the perfect SUV crossover, and it packs pin you to your seat power and premium intelligence all in one electric vehicle. The all-new, all-electric 2023 Nissan Ariya, the electric vehicle for people who love to drive. Shop now at nissanusa.com. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. Jump on over to Locked On Spurs for your second listen. Hear what Jeff Garcia has to say about the Spurs on a 2-game winning streak, all of a sudden beating the Jazz and Pacers. I thought this was fascinating to hear. The Spurs were 0-45 in games that they trailed by 10 entering this week, and now they have beaten the Jazz and Pacers in back-to-back games. They trailed by double digits in both games, so maybe Spurs turning a corner at a weird time to turn the corner. Who knows? But Jeff Garcia will have the latest on the Spurs for you. Here we're talking about the Pacers specifically. I want to talk about Andrew Nembhard. I saw a lot of chatter about him in this game, and to zoom in on specifically today, the reason there was a lot of chatter about Andrew Nembhard, well, he played 21 minutes. He went 0 for 8 from the field, 0 for 3 from deep. He had 2 rebounds, 2 assists, 1 turnover, and 4 points, all at the charity stripe, and a game low -15. The Pacers actually won the minutes they had with McConnell out there. He did well at the point guard spot. He ended up playing 31 minutes. That was the third most of anybody. The Nembhard minutes were a train wreck in this game, right? They did not go well. I don't think he would say they went well. When you go over 8, it's hard for things to go well. But this also ramped up the conversation about his play of late. And I forget who said rookie wall and associated it with him within the team or the coaches. I forget who it was, but someone hinted at it. And like that, this is generally the point where it happens a little sooner than this. And, you know, when you get to about game 40 or 50, that's like about a full college season plus NCAA tournament. And you're like, oh my God, we have 30 more games and 2 more months and all this stuff. And this can be when a rookie wall comes. But I'm not going to ascribe Andrew Nembhard's play recently to that, because I do think he's taken a little bit of a step back, and I think that a little bit of more is going on here. I don't want to spoil it too much yet, but looking at his season, right, he started off promising because of how he was playing, but also because he was significantly helping the Pacers switch their style, right? They were playing big, and that wasn't working. When they changed their starting lineup and other teams weren't used to it yet, or didn't have the scout down for the Pacers with this new look lineup, it was working really well. The small ball groups were clicking. Nembhard at the 2-3, whatever you want to call it, was going well. And he was much better in 2022 than 2023 when, one, they were doing better. Like when the starting 5 was being compared to the old starting 5, that was miserable. He was doing well. And 2, again, they weren't quite as well known on what their tendencies were and how they succeeded. As time has progressed, that unit has begun to look worse, and as has Nembhard's effectiveness, right? In the year 2022 specifically, Nembhard in 850 minutes basically was a -61 on the floor, right? That's not great, but that's fine, right? That's totally fine. His net rating in the year 2022 for the Pacers was -2.3 for a little over 500 team. Again, you'd hope for a little better, but that's that's a rookie. That's fine, right? That's okay. In the year 2023, the ongoing calendar year, Andrew Nembhard, after this game, whatever, he's at 687 minutes, and he's at minus 82. So already 21 points worse. He could go up. Plus and minus goes up and down, but it's worse, right? His plus minus is significantly worse. The net ratings bear out the same thing. The offensive rating for the Pacers with him out there in 2023 is 114. That's a half point worse than 2022. The defensive rating is 118.5. Whew, that's high, which is 0.7 points higher than it was in 2022. Caveats, obviously. Tyrese Haliburton's been out. The Pacers have been worse. It's been harder for them to do things, but it's impacting him in a way that it isn't impacting other guys as much, and I think that is a little concerning. And you don't have to just zoom out to team numbers to see a little bit of his struggles. You can go to his individual numbers as well, but also to finish up numbers, even over the course of this whole season. The Pacers' net rating with Nembhard on is minus 3.83. Their net rating with him off is minus 0.27. And the offensive rating and defensive rating are better with him on the bench than on the court. I don't think this means he's a bad player necessarily, but I think it kind of details what I'm going to get to in a second, which is he's not necessarily playing an optimized role for him and what he's good at. But to finish up on his individual stats, in the year 2022, once again, he played 32 games for the Pacers, 26 and a half minutes per game, 46.6% from the field, 38% from three, 87.5% from the line. That was 8.1 points and 3.8 assists per game. Solid numbers. He was really good for the Pacers for a while and was a worthy starter, right? He was named to the Rising Stars game for a reason, because he was good for a significant portion of the season. Got nominated for Rookie of the Month one time, right? He was very, I think in this recent stretch, people forgot how valuable he actually was early in the season. And his defense is still his calling card, right? I was chatting with someone on Twitter during this game who asked me about Nembhard's minutes, and I said defense is why he's out there, right? He's still, Nesmith's their best forward defender. Nembhard might be their best guard defender on the entire team. He should still play a role because of that. McConnell is doing well in that regard recently as well. That's what gets Nembhard out there. The offense is the less important thing for him right now, but it's been really struggling for him on offense recently. In the year 2023, Nembhard averaging 7.9 points per game. The assists are up to 4.5 because he played more point guard with Haliburton now, but the shooting splits 36.9% from the field, 28.6% from three, and 75% from the line. The efficiency has nosedived in this calendar year. You can ascribe that to a couple things, but I think one is that, with Haliburton out, he was a little over his head in terms of creation, right? You saw that in the very first game, I thought, that he was running the show with Haliburton out. He forced it a few times. I think it was against the Hawks, right? He forced it a few times in the mid-range game, and he has since reeled that back. But I think when you look at the team numbers and you look at his individual numbers kind of changing, what stands out to me and what has always stood out to me about Andrew Nembhard, right? If you've listened to the show for a long time, you'll remember back in Summer League, back in the preseason, even on Andrew Nembhard, he was really good against the Spurs the last time they played back in October. What always has impressed me about him is his passing in traffic, in the lane. He's so good at these tight angle passes, these reach around a defender to a big man, whatever the right spray out to a shooter is. When there's a lot of guys around him, he's kind of undeterred from throwing a bad pass. And I think that's hard to do and is impressive. And that's been one of those things that has always stood out to me about him. To do the things that he is good at, right? Penetrate a little bit, bend the defense, run a pick and roll, set up some good passes. You have to have the ball. And it doesn't make sense for him to have the ball a lot with this Pacers team. Tyrese Haliburton should have the ball all the time. Buddy Hield should have the ball enough to get his scoring chances. Miles Turner has been scoring well. He deserves his touches to have the ball. So him and Aaron Nesmith are left to be the fifth options. But Nembhard, that's not his thing, especially in this calendar year when the shot's not falling. In this game, again, 0 for 8, right? Those percentages I gave you, by the way, for him in 2023 were for tonight's 0 for 8 game. So subtract a little bit from all of them but the free throws. So I think for him, it's worth noting that I think he's just not quite in the right role. He's better with the ball than as an off-ball floater, shooter, whatever you want to call what he's doing. And that's why you've seen his assist numbers go up this year. When he has to run the show at point guard, he's okay, right? They were playing at their best early in the game when he was doing that. But when you mix and match him with other guys who need the ball, it's a little harder for him to be as impactful. So what is that? I see a lot of the Pacers make a starting lineup change. Maybe they should get forward in the mix, right? There's been a lot of talk from the team even about they're not a good rebounding team. Some of that's because of their size. But I don't know, though. What would Nembhard's role be with the bench that all of a sudden he is a little more optimized, right? And their defense, his defense is still important. So how do you get him out there and develop? He is a rookie who's a very promising rookie. He's still a good player despite currently being in a slump. So they have to kind of figure out what's real too between his early season and midseason. They should still continue to play him. I am not suggesting he should play less or be out of the rotation or anything like that. But does it make sense for him to potentially come off the bench and in a larger player start? I hate to be the I don't know guy. I should have takes, but I see both sides of it, right? I see that he fits well with the starting group because of his defense, but I also see that he could maybe get a little bit more optimized of a role if he was with the second unit at this stage of the season. Either way, the shots have to start falling, or there has to be more opportunities for him to play the game the way he's really good at, which is, a little bit slower pace than the Pacers play, get into the lane, methodically set stuff up, and be kind of a floor general type. But this was just one game, right? He's had better games than this, even in this calendar year, even more recently than tonight, where, of course, he wouldn't even say he had a good game. But remember, against Orlando just this Sunday, he had 13 points and 3 assists, right? He was good in that game. He had 10 points against Miami just before the All-Star break. He was good that night. He was good on his 10 assist game against the Suns, right? He's had good performances in this month, even specifically, right? The 6 and 7 game against the Cavs. I'm reading through too many now. You get the idea. But this game specifically, when he was really off, especially on a night where it feels like he could have stepped up a little more with Haliburton out, you kind of wonder where it's changed for him. And to me, it's that the role isn't exactly what it needs to be. And you see that as the season has progressed and maybe a rookie wall has hit, his impact has kind of waned for this team. So he's a guy that I think the Pacers will hope steps up a little bit in this last month of the season, because this was not a good game for him. Speaking of rookies, let's pivot and talk about one more today, and that's Kendall Brown, who, unfortunately for the Pacers, surgery on that tibia that was bothering him back in December and January. This one's a tough one for the rookie. We'll get to all of the latest on that, what it means for the Pacers and the Mad Ants and Kendall Brown to close out today's show. Before we do that, though, let me talk to you guys about Built Bar. Looking for a delicious treat but don't want all the fat and calories? You got to try a Built Bar. We're into March. If you're trying to eat healthier this year, this month, whatever, you just want to get healthier, then you have to try Built Bar. With Built Bar, healthy is actually tasty. They're so delicious, you won't think they're good for you, which is perfect for whatever your nutrition goals are. What makes them so good? Well, they're covered in 100% real chocolate. That's right, real chocolate, and so many unbelievable flavors. Peanut butter brownie, that's my favorite. Coconut, almond, churro, brownie batter, cookies and cream, double chocolate. They have fruit varieties. They're delightful. I don't know how they do it. They taste like a candy bar while maintaining amazing health macros. For example, only 130 calories, only 4 grams of sugar, a whopping 17 grams of protein. You got to try them. You could usually get them at Built.com, order them from there. But now you can also get them at your local Walmart or Sam's Club. Head to your nearest Walmart today. Get a 4-bar box of whatever flavor you choose, cookies and cream, coconut puffs, whatever. If you buy a Sam's Club 13-bar box with their hit flavors, brownie batter and churro. Thank me later, but try Built Bar today. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. For your second listen, jump on over to Locked On Warriors. Steph Curry coming back this weekend. Person reporting from Chris Haynes, and the Warriors actually playing pretty well in their recent games with Adam Jordan Poole. Right before I started recording, had a monster third quarter against the Clippers. I want to see how that game ended as soon as I hop off of this. Listen to Locked On Warriors for the latest on the defending champs, which is still sort of in this season, I think, been kind of lost. Let's talk about Kendall Brown. I haven't talked about him for a while. I'll dive into the Mad Ants at some point in the future. I might get up to Fort Wayne for a game in a couple weeks. But we'll talk about the Pacers and Mad Ants rookie for this one, because Kendall Brown out indefinitely per the Pacers after surgery on his right tibia. Per the team, it's a right tibia stress fracture. I stress the word fracture there. Oh, that was an unintentional pun, because earlier in this season, Kendall Brown missed about 6 weeks, a little more than that, with a stress reaction in the same right tibia, right? He, like, December 10th-ish, he went out. He played for the Pacers like 2 days before. Then he played for the Mad Ants. Then he was out with the stress reaction. He came back and played in the G League late January, right? And I asked him, like, hey, you played for the Pacers. You played a bunch of minutes for the Mad Ants. Like the night before we got this press release that you were out. Did something happen in that game? After that game, what led to this injury? Because it's a significant one to happen. And he said, oh, I had the article up. Oh, my goodness. He said, I was playing on it for a couple of months, just going to practice and games, just playing through it. I thought it was a little muscle thing. And then we took an MRI, and that's when they showed the stress reaction. That's when they told me to take a break and chill. So he had to sit out for a little bit, because this is what can happen. Stress reactions can turn into stress fractures. So they had him sit out for a while, and they determined it was good for him to go. Of course, he got back out there and played again. but it now becomes a fracture, right? He did the treatment for it at the time. He didn't know it was serious, so he played through it. And then he said he had surgery. He put on his Instagram story. Surgery went good, y'all. Blessings. Pacer said he's out indefinitely. I don't know if that's full season, but a stress fracture, generally a lengthy-ish recovery. It sure seems like something that would hold him out for the rest of the season. The Madden's regular season ends at the end of this month, right? So even the 6-week absence for the stress reaction would hold him out for the rest of the G League season. The Pacers probably have to make the playoffs for him to have a shot at returning. Anywhomst, though, season done or not, brutal for the Pacers. They traded away that 2026 second and cash to get Kendall Brown because they liked him in this draft. They really wanted him. They were hoping he'd be there at a pick that they could actually trade for, and they were able to pull that off. Unfortunately, injuries have kind of derailed what he's been able to do. With the Pacers specifically, only 6 games, only I think like 40 minutes. That's exactly right. 40. He's 4 for 7 from the field and has done some interesting stuff when playing, but hasn't gotten to play all that much, right? And so with a guy like him, you'd hope there's opportunity at the end of this season if the Pacers are out of it, or even if they're in it, but kind of are settled in, to get him out there and get him some opportunities. That's less likely now. In the G League, he did play a decent amount, 16 games at about 26 minutes per game. He averaged 10.3 points, 4.9 rebounds, and 2.1 assists with the Mad Ants this year. Shot 50% from the field, 32% from the three-point line, but was good at the foul line at 82%, right? Did some good stuff. I watched probably 10, 11 Mad Ants games this year. What always stood out to me with Kendall Brown were two things. His defense was good, especially on ball, right? His athleticism and speed really translates to lateral speed, which sometimes isn't always the case. And that allows him to stay in front of guys. He's a little bigger. The defense was there. Certainly that always impressed me about him. And the athleticism is, of course, the other one that allows him to make plays other guys can't. He's a threat in transition and can push it with the ball, right? He doesn't lose a lot of speed with the ball. That's always something that John Wall was really good at in his prime. When he was dribbling up the court full speed, Giannis is good at this. They don't lose speed when they're dribbling. Kendall Brown is obviously not an NBA superstar, but he does not lose as much speed when he's dribbling. That's impressive. And so he did some good stuff. He showed why the Pacers would be high on a guy like that, right? If you can defend and be an athlete on the wing, that is potentially valuable. If you can develop any sort of ball skills or in between shooting skills that can get you on an NBA floor. Unfortunately, now the Pacers will not be able to explore that for the rest of the season. The rehab here will be really important, right? He's still 19. That's absolutely crazy to think about, that he is still not 20 years old. And he won't be till May, right? So for the rest of the season, he will still be 19. But tough luck for him to only get 22 total games between the NBA and G League this season to grow during his rookie season, because the Pacers really wanted him. And his rehab is pretty important because, again, the Pacers wanted him, and we're getting a little ahead of ourselves here, but after a 1-year, 2-way deal, the Pacers can make him a restricted free agent. If they like him and want him back, even on another 2-way deal, they can do that. And they got to, of course, evaluate him in those 6 Pacers games and those 16 Mad Ants games. And, of course, in their own practices and training camp in summer league, all sorts of opportunities, they know what they have with him and if they believe in him. And they have a history of this kind of thing before with bringing back Ben Moore on a second year after a 2-way. He wasn't injured. Edmund Sumner was injured. They brought him back for a second season. He actually signed a 2-year 2-way originally. So if they believe in Brown and want to explore his game after rehab, perhaps it's a possibility that they would retain him next year, maybe on another 2-way deal, maybe on something else. I don't know. But for a guy that they, again, traded stuff to get, they really liked him and showed a decent amount of promise in the G League, I would think that maybe they would consider something like that. It's too early to say, but I'm just thinking of the long-term impacts here. In terms of short-term impacts for the Pacers, basically none. He wasn't playing in their rotation. It's not even like he's the first guy that would have been in the rotation if there was an injury, considering some of the young guys they have just on the outside looking in anyway. So no real impact for the Pacers unless they were considering pivoting to giving him a little bit more time down the stretch of this season, right? They gave tons of time to Gabe York, for example. If you're in the last 2 games last year, Dwayne Washington and Terry Taylor, of course, were playing on their 2-ways quite a bit last year. That's now off the table, obviously. And then for the Mad Ants, it's a much bigger impact. They're actually playing pretty well, 4th in the East, down in the G League. They just added Elfrid Payton, if you remember him from the NBA, and traded for Jordan Bone, a 2-year NBA vet as well. Mad Ants rolling right now. We'll have coverage of them again coming here on this show. But the impact for them is that they lose a little bit of wings. They just traded David Ostervitas as well. So they're a little lighter at that spot, but Jermaine Samuels has been great for them on the wing. They still have Justin Anderson. They still, of course, have Trevlin Queen, Pedro Bradshaw. They'll be fine, but they are lighter in that spot now as their playoff push continues. They have a lot of road games, road heavy schedule for the Mad Ants to close out the season. So Pacers will hope Kendall Brown recovers quickly, as will he, because he's only 19, and perhaps this is something that is rediscussed at a future date. But a bummer injury for a rookie who had some defensive and athletic promise, and a guy that the Pacers really liked, to the point that they traded stuff to get a mid-late second rounder to grab Kendall Brown. That's it for today's show. Next week, lots of fun stuff. Pacers Bulls on Sunday. I'll be there in Chicago. Excited to drive up for that one. We'll be talking about that game. Anything learned about the Pacers? Did they get the tiebreaker over the Bulls? That's a big game for the Pacers. Does Haliburton even return? That's also critically important. We'll be talking Sixers, all sorts of stuff coming next week on this show. Hoping maybe to talk to Terry Taylor in Chicago too. We can talk about what he had to say. All sorts of fun stuff coming here on the Locked On Pacers podcast. Thank you guys so much for listening today. Have a great weekend. We'll see you on Monday.